Hello, I'm doing a review for this book. It's The Sisters of Auschwitz by Roxane van Iperen. I hope I've pronounced that okay, and if I haven't, then I apologise now. This book is the true story of two Jewish sisters living in the Netherlands during the time of Nazi occupation. This comprehensive retelling covers the sisters' time growing up and even briefly covers their parents' early time together. It then covers their time in the Dutch resistance before they are eventually arrested and sent to Auschwitz concentration camp and later to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. I found the beginning of the book a little slow because there was a lot of information being laid out about different people and where they lived and how they knew each other and so on and so on. Once the main characters were established, the book moved on to when the Nazis invaded the Netherlands. Originally it was presented as being on civil terms, and there was even a Dutch Nazi party. The Nazis were known to be fascist and anti-Jewish, but they didn't instantly destroy the way of life that people knew and enjoyed. Things were done bit by bit. The Nazis didn't burst in and demand Jewish people be sent out to concentration camps and murdered. First, everyone had to have identity cards. Then Jewish people had to have a J on their identity papers. Then lists of all the Jewish people were collated. Jewish people weren't allowed to work in certain sectors or go to certain places. And then people were being rounded up to work in German labour camps. Only a small number at first, but eventually all Jewish people were targeted, and anyone who wanted to survive either had to go into hiding or get a false identity. Something that occurred to me when I was reading this is how much more effective the Nazis would be nowadays at rounding up people they wanted to get rid of. Today, so much of our lives are online. It's easy to find out where we live, where we work, our friends and families, our movements, our bank details, pretty much anything they would want to know. It would be much harder to hide or change identity today than it was then. Many of the non-Jewish Dutch people went to great lengths to help the people being targeted, but it wasn't enough. And as the war wore on, more people became insular. But the lengths that many people went to, from all sides, to help the people being persecuted by the Nazis was encouraging. Many people knew just how wrong what was happening was, even if they were too scared to outwardly oppose it. The two Jewish sisters at the centre of this book fairly quickly became involved in the underground resistance against the Nazis. It was very interesting to read about the things they were involved with, from getting people forged papers and stolen food coupons, to distributing underground magazines from their baby's pram, and organising or personally hiding people. Van Iperen's writing here was excellent. The tension was high when she described the characters travelling around the country, doing their resistance work. I was eagerly reading page after page, on the edge of my seat, eager to find out if they would get away with it each time. The book details very well the oppressive lifestyle that people were living in the occupied Netherlands. After moving from Amsterdam to The Hague, the sisters and their families later moved to a large house in an area of woodland not too far from Amsterdam. They are fairly isolated, being between two villages, and they begin taking in more people who have gone into hiding. By this time, all known Jewish people are being forced to live in the ghetto in Amsterdam before being sent out on trains to the east. No one is returning. The tension is palpable. You get a strong sense of what life was like living in constant fear. The book was rich with extra information that wasn't directly part of the sisters' story, but which added greatly to the book, such as information about how many Jewish people were sent out of the Netherlands, details of more extreme action that resistance fighters took to try and end the Nazi oppression. as well as heartbreaking personal stories of people caught up in the awful events of that time. Reading about children being hidden particularly upset me. Families sending their children away before the family was deported, not knowing where their children were going or if they would be safe or if they would ever see them again. It was absolutely heartbreaking. I knew that children were in hiding and that they were sent to and murdered at concentration camps, but I hadn't really thought about it on a personal level. And this book really opened it up and allowed me to experience a fraction of the gut-wrenching agony that parents would have experienced. I knew that the sisters would eventually be found out. The book is called The Sisters of Auschwitz, so you know it's coming. But it was still awful when it did happen. I was biting my nails with the tension leading up to them being discovered. I wanted to keep reading, but I didn't want to read on and see it all collapse. It was 1944 when they were discovered, and they had come so far and achieved so much. It was terrible when they were found out. I was also disappointed when they were discovered because I had found Van Iperen's writing on the Dutch resistance so rich and immersive that I didn't want to leave that world. Luckily, or unluckily, Van Iperen's writing is so excellent that the world of the concentration camps was brought alive in full colour as well. Van Iperen's writing shone as she transported the reader to these places. Right from her description of the journey to the camps, you could feel the claustrophobia of the train carriages, the fear, the lack of space to breathe. The book had been a tearjerker throughout, but at this point I couldn't stop myself crying when I read in such perfect descriptive detail about what people went through. The lives of the people at the camps and the unimaginable scales of death were shown with excellent care and detail by Van Iperen. It was difficult to read because it was so upsetting, but her brilliant writing brings the reader gradually on as the Nazis panic and move their prisoners to other camps and things deteriorate further. The hopes for freedom, which turn into worsening starvation and degradation, and it becomes harder and harder for people to cling on to life. Brilliantly written as it was of course very difficult to read about what the people in the book went through. I don't understand how it was done to people. To starve them, prolong this torture, this slow, awful death to so many people. How can it be true that humans systematically did this to other humans? Thousands of them, hundreds of thousands of them. How can it be true that humans can do these things? So in conclusion, I thought that this book, The Sisters of Auschwitz, was an excellent book. It was very well written. There was an admirable amount of thought and detail put in, and the atmosphere was completely immersive. I was on the brink of tears most of the way through the book, and at other times in floods of tears. It was really detailed, incredibly well researched, and filled with heartbreaking personal stories. I cannot recommend this book enough. It was excellent. A truly remarkable story of courage and faith against all odds. Okay, thank you.